The first thing Ambassador Velshera said to me was not a greeting. It was a measurement. She looked me over the way you might look at a piece of furniture you did not order but had already been delivered. Her eyes, silver and wide apart, moved from my boots to my face and then settled somewhere around my collarbone, as though she had decided that was the most interesting part of me, which, given that I am not a particularly tall or impressive-looking man, was probably accurate. "You are the protective assignment," she said. Not a question, a conclusion. "Sergeant Marcus Vale," I said. "Earth Defense Corps, retired. Currently contracted to the Accord Security Division." She made a small sound in the back of her throat. It was not quite dismissive. It was something quieter than that. Something that said she had already filed me away in a category labeled harmless and was ready to move on. I let her. "My name is Marcus Vale. I am 39 years old. I grew up in a small town in northern England called Hexham, which sits beside a river that floods every winter and has a high street with more charity shops than anything else. I joined the military at 18 because I did not know what else to do, and because a recruiter told me I had good spatial awareness, which I later learned was something they said to everyone. I served for 16 years, most of them in places that do not appear on news broadcasts. Then I retired, picked up a contractor badge from the Accord Security Division, and ended up on a rotating orbital station above a gas giant called Mevrith 9, standing 3 paces behind a Velcan diplomat who thought I was furniture. I did not mind. Furniture does not have to make conversation. The conclave ring was the kind of place that made you feel small on purpose. It had been designed by 7 different species over 200 years, and each of them had added something. So the result was a structure that was simultaneously enormous and confusing and somehow beautiful, the way a city is beautiful when you're standing at the edge of it at night. Corridors wide enough for species I had no name for. Ceilings so high they had their own weather. Gravity adjusted by section, so that walking from the diplomatic wing to the transit hub involved a slow, strange feeling in your chest, like the universe was gently reminding you that nothing about it was built for you specifically. I had been on the conclave ring for 11 days when I was assigned to Velshera. Before that, I had been doing perimeter work on the outer docking levels, which mostly involved standing near airlocks and looking reliable. I was good at looking reliable. It is one of my better skills. The assignment came through a man named Owen Price, who ran the Accord Security Division's human desk. Owen was from Cardiff, had a thick beard that was going gray at the edges, and communicated almost entirely in short sentences and meaningful silences. "Diplomatic protection," he said, sliding a data chip across the desk. "Ambassador, Velkan, high-ranking, big conclave vote coming up. Humanities permanent membership pétition." I picked up the chip. "And they want a human guard?" Owen shrugged. "She asked for something, quote, suitably docile. We sent her you." I thought about being offended. Then I thought about the pension supplement that came with a diplomatic protection contract and decided I was fine. Ambassador Velshera was a senior figure in something called the Velcan Diplomatic Collective, which was one of the oldest member species in the Galactic Accord. The Velcan had been in space for roughly 4,000 years longer than humans had been writing things down. They were elegant, long-lived, politically sophisticated, and, for what I could observe in the first 48 hours, quietly convinced that every other species in the Accord was doing its best given its limitations. She was not cruel about it. That would have required more engagement than she gave. She was simply certain, in the way that people are certain about things they have never thought to question, that the universe had a hierarchy and that she understood where everyone in it sat. I sat, apparently, somewhere between useful and unremarkable. Her quarters on the conclave ring were in the senior diplomatic wing, Section 12, which had the kind of quiet that only expensive places have. The corridors were lined with panels that changed color slowly, cycling through something that looked like a sunset on a world I had never seen. The air smelled faintly of something I could not name. Every surface was smooth. My job was simple enough on paper. I walked behind her. I stood near doors. I watched rooms. I filed daily security assessments with Owen's office. I did not speak unless spoken to, which suited both of us. What she did not know, and had not asked, was anything at all about where I came from. That was not unusual. Most species in the Accord had a vague awareness that humans existed, that we had been granted provisional membership 2 years ago, and that we had shown up in galactic politics the way a new student shows up at a school mid-year, slightly out of place, watched with curiosity, not yet trusted with anything important. What most of them did not know, because it was buried in a technical annex of the Accord's planetary classification database that nobody read voluntarily, was what Earth actually was. I was aware of this. I had read the classification myself, out of curiosity, about a week after arriving on the conclave ring. It was listed under Category 7, Extreme Hazard Biosphere, Sustained Sapient Habitation, Classification Pending Review. The notes in the margin of the technical annex, added by the Accord survey team that had cataloged Earth 60 years ago, were something I kept thinking about. One of them read, in plain Accord standard, recommend caution. Dominant sapient species appears unaware of threat level. Further study warranted. We were aware of the threat level. We had just stopped finding it interesting. On my third day with Velshera, she had a meeting with a delegation from a species called the Shanri, who were small, quick-moving, and communicated partly through color changes in the skin of their forearms. The meeting was in a conference room off the main diplomatic corridor. I stood near the door. For 2 hours, I watched the light change in the corridor panels and thought about nothing in particular, which is a skill that takes years to develop and which I had developed very thoroughly. After the meeting, as we walked back toward her quarters, Velshera said, without looking at me, "You stood still for 2 hours." "Yes," I said. "Most humans fidget." "I used to," I said. "I practice not." She looked at me then, briefly, the way you look at something that has done something slightly unexpected. Then she looked away again and did not say anything else. It was the longest conversation we had in the first week. I did not mind. I was watching the corridors, the intersections, the faces of the other species moving through the diplomatic wing. I was noting which security panels were slow to respond, which corridor junctions had blind spots, which of the Velkan diplomatic staff walked with their eyes forward, and which ones watched the rooms. I was building a picture, the way I had been trained to build pictures quietly and without urgency, so that when something happened, I would already know the shape of the space I was standing in. Something was going to happen. I could feel it the way you feel weather coming, not as a specific thought, but as a low, steady awareness. The conclave vote on humanity's permanent membership was in 12 days. The Keldrath sovereignty, the faction most loudly opposed to human membership, had 3 of their senior arbiters on the station. I had seen them twice in the common transit corridors. They were large, physically imposing, with a kind of deliberate presence that was designed to make other species feel small. They did not make me feel small, but I did not say that to anyone. On day 9 of the assignment, I sent Owen a message that said simply, increasing background tension. Recommend enhanced corridor protocols. Owen sent back, noted, budget doesn't cover it. Use your judgment. I had expected that. Velshera, meanwhile, was working. Whatever else she was not idle. I watched her move through the Accord's political machinery with the ease of someone who had been doing it for a very long time. She read documents at a pace that suggested she was absorbing rather than skimming. She spoke to other ambassadors with the precise social calibration of someone who understood exactly how much warmth each relationship required and gave it in exactly that amount, and no more. She was, in her own way, impressive. On the evening of day 9, she sat at the long desk in her suite, reviewing something on her screen, and said to the room, not quite to me, the Keldrath are planning a formal challenge. I know, I said. She turned. She had not expected me to respond, I think, and she had certainly not expected me to already know. Ow! Their senior arbiter has met privately with 4 swing vote delegations in 3 days, I said. All of them left the meetings looking uncertain. Whatever he said to them, he is building a case. The formal challenge is the next logical step. She looked at me for a long moment. 3 full seconds, which I had learned was significant for a Velkan. They process social information very quickly, and 3 seconds meant genuine pause. You have been watching, she said. That is what you hired me for, I said. She turned back to her screen. But something in her posture had shifted just slightly. the angle of her shoulders. It was not respect, not yet, but it was the beginning of the recognition that the furniture might be paying attention. I went back to watching the door. Outside, the gas giant Meverith. 9 turned in the dark, enormous and indifferent, wrapped in bands of deep orange and pale gold. The conclave ring orbited it slowly, carrying 4,000 species and all of their politics. And somewhere in those corridors, the thing I had been quietly waiting for was getting ready to move. I was ready too. I had been ready since Hexam, without knowing it. Since the hills above the town where I used to run in the dark, on winter mornings before the light came, on ground that was wet and cold and did not care whether I was tired. Since the first time I understood, very young, that the world was not soft and that this was not a problem. It was just information. Velshera thought she had hired furniture. She had hired something considerably more interesting. She did not know it yet. The morning it happened, the air felt different. That is not something I can explain scientifically. The conclave ring's environmental systems were precise to the point of being mechanical. The same recycled oxygen, the same temperature, the same faint hum of the rotation drives. But I had spent enough time in enough places where something was about to go wrong to know that the feeling was real even when it had no physical source. It was the way the corridor felt slightly more empty than usual. The way the diplomatic staff I passed each morning were walking a little faster, not making eye contact. The way the overhead lighting in Section 12 seemed exactly the same and yet somehow seemed to be trying too hard. I noted all of this without changing anything about how I walked or where I looked. Velshera had a meeting that morning with the Shanri follow-up delegation, then a transit to the Central Policy Archive in Wing 7 to review documents related to the membership petition. I had walked the transit route twice the night before, once quickly and once slowly, noting every junction and every door and every recessed alcove where the corridor walls stepped back to accommodate conduit access panels. The third alcove past Junction 9, on the left side going west, was 12 feet deep and 4 feet wide enough for 3 large individuals to stand in without being visible from the main corridor until you were almost level with it. I had noted this. I had not mentioned it to Velshera because I did not want to alarm her before I had anything concrete, and because the best response to the kind of threat I was anticipating was not heightened nervousness in the person I was protecting. It was quiet preparation in myself. We left her suite at 9 in the morning, Accord Standard Time. The Shanri meeting ran slightly over, which put us behind schedule, which meant the transit corridor to Wing 7 would be less busy than the normal morning flow. I moved slightly closer to Velshera's left shoulder than my usual 3 paces. She did not notice. The corridor was quiet. The panel lighting cycled through something amber and slow. 2 members of her diplomatic staff walked ahead of us, carrying document cases. I was watching the corridor behind us in my peripheral vision, and the corridor ahead, and the spaces between. Junction 9. Turn right. West corridor. Long and straight and very quiet. First alcove. Second alcove. I felt something not heard, not seen, just the displacement of air that happens when something large stops moving suddenly. Third alcove. I said quietly and without raising my voice, Velshera, stop walking and step to the right wall. She did not stop. She turned her head to look at me. Now, I said. She stopped. She stepped right. 3 figures came out of the alcove. The one in the lead was a Keldrath enforcer. I had seen his type before from a distance in the transit hub. They averaged about 8 feet in height and were built in a way that suggested the species had evolved on a world where being large was the primary survival strategy. Wide shoulders, long arms, a skull structure that sat forward on a thick neck. They were covered in plates of a natural armor-like material, dark gray, that had the texture of stone and the reflectivity of wet slate. They moved with the slow, heavy confidence of things that had never had a reason to hurry, because nothing they encountered required urgency. The 2 flanking him were smaller, which for a Keldrath meant only slightly taller than me, and they were carrying equipment I recognized as restraint tools. Not weapons exactly, but the Accord equivalent of something used to make a point. The lead enforcer looked past me at Velshera, and said something in Keldrath that my translation ship converted to a formal withdrawal demand. The political kind, the kind that is phrased politely enough that it cannot technically be called a threat, but that means exactly one thing. He was telling her to remove humanity's membership petition or there would be consequences. I was standing between him and her. He looked at me. I looked back. I was aware that from his perspective, I was a small, not particularly impressive human male in a plain dark jacket, and that I was standing in front of him the way a household object might stand in the road before a large vehicle. He had every statistical and physical reason to believe this would take about 4 seconds. I had spent 16 years learning what to do in the next 4 seconds. He moved first, which I had expected. The opening move of species with a physical size advantage is almost always a reach and grab, because it has worked every time before. He extended one arm toward my shoulder. I was not where my shoulder had been. I will not dwell on the details. Fighting is not something I find interesting to describe. What I can say is that the corridor was small enough that their numbers worked against them rather than for them, and that I had already, in the seconds between seeing them and this moment, worked out where each of them was likely to be and what was likely to happen if I moved in a particular direction. The thinking had already been done. The movement was just movement. 30 seconds, possibly slightly less. At the end of it, all 3 were on the floor. None of them were seriously injured. I had been trained very specifically in the difference between stopping someone and hurting someone, and I had applied that training with care. I straightened up. I checked my jacket, which had stayed remarkably tidy given the circumstances. I reached into my left interior pocket and took out 3 sets of restraint ties, which I had been carrying since day one, and which Owen had looked at with one raised eyebrow when I had signed them out from the equipment room. Expecting trouble, he had said. Just prepared, I had said. I secured all 3 of them efficiently, checked the restraints, then turned around. Velshera was standing against the right wall of the corridor, exactly where I had told her to stand. She had not moved. Her eyes, silver and wide, were looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. She was not afraid of the 3 large beings on the floor. She was afraid of me. Not in the way that would make her want to run. In the way that makes you very still, very careful, and very aware that your understanding of something has just been wrong in a significant way, and you're not sure yet how to correct it. I walked to the wall panel and opened the security channel. This is Vale, Diplomatic Protection, Section 7 West Corridor, Junction 9+3. I need a containment team and a medical check. 3 detainees, no injuries requiring emergency care. The acknowledgement came back immediately. I closed the channel and looked at Velshera. Are you all right? She looked at me for what felt like a long time. Yes, she said, and her voice was entirely steady. Whatever she was not someone who fell apart. I gave her credit for that. We should keep moving, I said. The containment team will handle this. We can give full statements afterward. She nodded. We walked. After 30 seconds of walking, she said, You were carrying those restraints already. Yes. You expected this. I thought it was possible. Another silence. Then, they're Keldrath enforcers. Their species is on the Accord's Tier 1 physical assessment list. It means they are categorized as among the most physically capable species in the Accord. I know, I said. You do not seem troubled by that. I thought about how to answer. I grew up somewhere where the things you needed to be careful of did not come in tiers, I said. They were just there, and you learned, and then you were careful. The category did not change what you had to do. She was quiet after that for a while. Then, somewhere around the midpoint of the transit corridor, she said, Where did you grow up? Northern England, I said. Small town. Not much there. On Earth. Yes. She said nothing more until we reached the archive. But I noticed for the rest of the walk that she was paying attention to the corridors in a way she had not been before. Not with fear, with a kind of recalibration. She was updating something. I did not know what she had known about Earth before that morning, but I had the sense that whatever it was, it had just stopped being sufficient. That evening, Owen called me on the private channel. 3 Keldrath detainees, he said. Formal complaint filed with Accord security by the Keldrath delegation. They're calling it a violation of diplomatic conduct. They entered a diplomatic transit corridor and attempted to physically coerce a senior ambassador, I said. I know that. We know that. The complaint is political. They want you removed from the assignment. What does the ambassador say? Owen was quiet for a moment. She refused. Invoked full diplomatic protection rights under Article 12 of the Accord Security Charter. I had not expected that. Not yet. Not from her. She also, Owen added, asked for your full service record. The unredacted version. I thought about that. Did you send it? I sent it, he said. Then, after a pause, Marcus, she's going to read about Earth. I know, I said. The classification files, the survey notes, the whole thing. I know. Another pause. You're not worried about that. No, I said. He made the sound he made when he was not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. Get some sleep, he said, and closed the channel. I stood at the narrow window in my quarters, looking out at Mevrith 9. The bands of orange and gold moved very slowly, the way clouds move when you watch them from a distance, and they look still but are not. I was not worried about Velshira reading my service record. I was not worried about her finding the Earth classification files. I was not worried about any of the things that were building toward the conclave vote. I had grown up on a Deathworld. I had run in the dark on wet hills at 5 in the morning before the light came. I had served in 16 years of assignments that did not appear on news broadcasts. I had been carrying the weight of a category that most of the galaxy had never heard of quietly, without drama, the way you carry things that have always been true. The Keldrath were coming. The formal challenge was coming. The vote was coming. I was already ready. I went to sleep. The Grand Conclave Chamber was built to make you feel the weight of history. I know that because I had read the architectural notes, which were available in the Accord public database to anyone who bothered to look, and which stated, in the formal language of Accord documentation, that the chamber had been designed to convey the accumulated gravity of 4,000 years of interspecies cooperation. It was 800 feet across. The ceiling was a dome of some material that was transparent in a way that showed the stars outside without distortion, so that when you looked up, you saw actual space, deep and dark and full. The seating rose in concentric rings around a central floor, and on the day of a full session, every seat was filled with every species that held Accord membership, observers, delegates, staff, and the various other beings that attached themselves to moments of political significance. I stood on the central floor, 3 paces behind Velshira. She had requested I be present. The Keldrath had filed a secondary motion that morning to have me removed from the chamber on the grounds that I represented a disruption to proceedings, citing the corridor incident as evidence of instability. Velshira had declined the motion, formally, in writing, before the session opened. It was, as I understood it, a significant move. It put her name publicly behind my presence. I was aware of being looked at by approximately 4,000 beings. I did not find this particularly interesting. I stood at parade rest, hand behind my back, and watched the chamber. High Arbiter Sorveth of the Keldrath Sovereignty was seated in the Challenger's Arc, the elevated section on the eastern ring reserved for those who had filed formal proceedings. He was larger than his enforcers. Where they had been built for physical action, he had the additional quality of someone who had learned that stillness was its own kind of weight. He sat without moving, without adjusting, without any of the small motions that most species made when they were waiting. He just sat, and the air around him felt heavier for it. The Accord presiding chair opened the session. The petition documentation was formally entered. Velshira gave her preliminary remarks, which were measured and precise and politically elegant, and I watched the chamber while she spoke, watching the small movements, who leaned toward whom, who looked uncertain, who was already decided. Then Sorveth rose to deliver the formal challenge. He spoke for a long time. He was good at it. He had the kind of voice that filled space without effort, and he used it the way a skilled advocate uses a voice, with paced changes and deliberate pauses and the occasional moment of something that was almost warmth, which made the cold parts feel colder by contrast. He spoke about stability. He spoke about the Accord's commitment to responsible membership. He spoke about the careful vetting process that had always protected the galactic community from, and this was his phrase, well-intentioned incompatibility. Then he pulled up the Earth classification file. He read it aloud. Not all of it. He selected. He was precise about what he chose. He read the atmospheric data, the disease vector density, the geological instability record, the ratio of lethal to non-lethal fauna, the UV radiation exposure levels, the tectonic activity frequency. He read the survey team's notation about the planet's Category 7 classification. He read the note about the dominant sapient species appearing unaware of the threat level. And then he paused. The chamber was very quiet. This, he said, is where our petitioning species originates. A world that the Accord's own survey team classified as the most hazardous categorized biosphere in the current database. A world on which life exists in a state of perpetual environmental emergency. We are being asked to grant full voting rights and permanent membership to a species that evolved, and I use this word with care, inside conditions that would render any other member species extinct within a single generation. He let that sit. The chamber was very, very quiet. I do not question the sincerity of human ambition, he continued. I question only this. What does it say about a species that calls such a world home? What does it tell us about their relationship to stability, to diplomacy, to the careful and considered structures that have made the Accord what it is for 4,000 years? A species shaped by chaos will carry chaos with them. It is not malice. It is simply what they are. He sat, and then something happened that was not in any plan, not mine, not Velshera's, not anyone's. I spoke. I did not raise my hand. I did not request the floor. I simply spoke in plain, clear Accord standard at a volume that carried without shouting for where I stood on the central floor. May I respond to that? The presiding chair looked at me. The chamber looked at me. 4,000 species, looking at one person in a plain dark jacket standing on the central floor. The presiding chair said, slowly, "You are not a recognized delegate. I am the personal protection assignment of Ambassador Velshera of the Velcan Diplomatic Collective," I said. "I'm also a human being from Earth. I believe I am the only one in this chamber. If the High Arbiter wishes to speak about what my species is, I would like the opportunity to also speak about what my species is." There was a long pause. The presiding chair looked at Velshera. She gave a single nod. "You may speak," the presiding chair said, as a recognized observer. 3 minutes. I stepped forward. I did not look at Sorveth. I looked at the chamber. "High Arbiter Sorveth read from our planetary classification file," I said. "I would like to add some context that the file does not include." I spoke for 2 minutes and 43 seconds. I know this because I counted the way I count things quietly out of habit. I told them about what I had done for training when I was 18 years old. I told them about the part where we were put into a wilderness environment in February, which is winter in the northern hemisphere of Earth, with a temperature that dropped below 0 Celsius, and given 3 days of food supplies that were deliberately insufficient, and told to walk to a marked location that was 60 miles away through terrain that included a mountain range. I told them that this was considered a standard component of introductory military training. I told them that we had lost 2 candidates to hypothermia. I told them that the rest of us had finished. I told them that I had been 19 at the time and had not found it particularly unusual, because growing up on Earth means that understanding how to move through conditions that want to stop you is not specialized knowledge. It is ordinary knowledge. It is the kind of thing you know the way you know how to read. I told them about endurance predation. I told them that before humans developed tools or organized society, the primary hunting technique of our species was to follow prey animals on foot, in heat, for hours or sometimes days, until the animal, which was faster than us in the short run, exhausted itself and could no longer continue. I told them that this is where human endurance comes from. We were not born with armor, or great speed, or claws, or scales, or natural weapons of any kind. We were born with the ability to keep going when everything else stopped. Our bodies cool themselves through a system of surface evaporation that is, as far as current Accord biological research indicates, unique among all known sapient species. We can run in heat that would shut down most other biological systems. We do not stop. I told them about the immune system. About the fact that Earth's biosphere is so aggressively populated with things that would kill you. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, each one adapted over millions of years to defeat the defenses of living things. That the human immune system evolved into something that is, from a biological standpoint, extremely unusual. It fights multiple threats simultaneously, learns from each encounter, adapts, and passes certain learned responses down through generations. We are not healthy because our world is safe. We are healthy because our world tried very hard to kill us for a very long time, and we kept updating. I told them about cooperation under pressure, about how the single trait that, more than any other, allowed humans to survive and eventually build the civilization that eventually built the ships that eventually arrived at the Accord was this: we trust strangers. Under stress, under threat, even when we have no prior relationship and no established reason. We are one of the only known species that forms functional cooperative groups with strangers in emergency situations quickly, without prior bonding protocols, without shared history. When something goes wrong, we organize. We help people we have never met. We do it instinctively. I told them all of this in a plain, even voice, without drama, without raising my volume, without the kind of pacing or rhetorical structuring that Sorveth had used. I just told them the way you tell someone something that is simply true. And then I said the last thing. High Arbiter Sorveth asked what it tells you about a species that calls such a world home. I will answer that directly. It tells you this. We did not survive the Deathworld. We domesticated it. The chamber was silent. Not the polite silence between speakers. Not the managed silence of a formal proceeding. A different kind of silence. A silence that had texture and weight. The kind of silence that falls when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and every being in the room is processing it at once. And the processing takes a moment. I step back. I return to my position 3 paces behind Velshera. I stood at parade rest. I did not look at Sorveth. I watched the chamber. The first thing I noticed was the Shanri delegation in the 3rd ring. The small, quick-moving beings who communicated with color changes in their forearms. Their forearms were all displaying the same color, a deep, pulsing blue. I did not know what it meant in their language, but every one of them was showing it at once. The second thing I noticed was that 3 of the swing vote delegations who had met with Sorveth privately in the previous days were now sitting differently. Straighter, more still. The posture of beings who had just received new information that had changed the shape of the problem they were thinking about. The third thing I noticed was that Sorveth, for the first time since the session had opened, had shifted his weight. Just slightly. Just enough. Velshera did not turn around, but she said, very quietly, at a volume only I could hear a single word. Good. That night, she asked me to stay after she dismissed the rest of the staff. The suite was quiet. The color panels had cycled down to something cool and blue, a slow, regular pulse like breathing. She was standing at the wide window, looking out at Mevrith 9, and for a moment I stood in the doorway and watched her, thinking that she looked from behind like someone who was doing arithmetic on something very large. Sit, she said without turning. He said, this was new. I had not sat in her presence before. There had been no reason to, and the asymmetry of the arrangement, her at the desk, me at the door, had suited us both. Now she was offering the chair across from the long table as though the arrangement had changed and both of us should acknowledge it. She came away from the window and sat across from me. She folded her hands on the table. Her silver eyes looked at me with the focused attention of someone who had been thinking about a question for a while and had decided to ask it. I read your service record, she said. I know. All of it. The unredacted version. I know. There are sections in it, she said, that describe environments and circumstances that I would like to discuss, but for which I am not certain I have the correct reference frame. That is probably fair, I said. The incident in the classification reference, the one where your unit was deployed without communication equipment for 11 days in terrain that your own military categorized as extreme hazard. That was a training assessment, I said. I am aware it was a training assessment, she said, and there was something in her voice, not quite exasperation, but the cousin of it. That is precisely what I want to discuss. You were being assessed for readiness by being placed in conditions that the Accord's environmental database would classify as unsuitable for unprotected personnel. Yes, and you passed. 14 out of 22 did, I said, which was considered a good cohort. She was quiet. I had the sense of the arithmetic continuing. Marcus, she said, and it was the first time she had used my first name. Yes. What is Earth actually like? Not the classification file. Not the survey notes. What is it like to live there? I thought about this for a moment. Not about what to say. I knew what I wanted to say, but about how to say it in a way that was honest rather than dramatic, because the dramatic version would be less accurate than the honest one. It is very full, I said. Everything on Earth is trying to do something. The plants compete for light, and they grow in ways that other plants cannot reach, and the animals that eat the plants are being eaten themselves, and the weather is constantly making and remaking the landscape. Every system is in motion. You grow up understanding that motion as normal as background. You do not think about it the way you might think about something unusual. It is just the texture of being alive. She was listening in the way she listened when she had decided the information was important, fully, without multitasking. And you find it, she said carefully, comfortable? Yes, I said. She looked at me. The conclave ring has the most stable and precisely maintained environment in the Accord, she said. Every parameter is controlled. The temperature fluctuates by less than half a degree across the entire station. The atmospheric composition never varies. The gravity is calibrated to within 0.1% of standard across every section. She paused. I have heard several members of the human diplomatic support staff mention feeling, and I'm using a word they used flat, as though the environment is too still. I almost smiled. Yes, that is a real thing. How do you manage it? You find ways to add variation. You run. You create small challenges. Some people find arguments helpful, just the ordinary kind, nothing serious, just enough friction to feel like something is happening. She studied me. You are very calm, she said. In situations where other species would not be calm, you are calm. In the corridor, with 3 Keldrath enforcers. In the chamber today, speaking before 4,000 beings without any preparation. The conclave chamber is not dangerous, I said. In the Deathworld sense. I was in no physical risk. It was just a room. Just a room, she repeated, quietly, as though she was putting those words somewhere to think about later. What will happen with the vote? I asked. She considered. Sorveth has damaged his own case, she said. He intended to use the Deathworld classification as evidence of human unsuitability. Instead, you made it evidence of something else. She tilted her head. I do not know yet what the swing votes will decide. But 3 of the delegations that have been uncertain are no longer uncertain in the same direction as before. You changed the shape of the argument. You would have changed it, I said. You were prepared. I was prepared to argue diplomacy, policy, history, legal framework, she said. I was not prepared to argue what you argued, because I did not know what I did not know about you. She looked at me steadily. I made an assumption when you were assigned to me. I know, I said. I assumed you were. She paused, chose the word precisely, adequate for the basic requirements of the role. That is what Owen Price told me you asked for. For a moment, something moved across her face. It was brief and hard to categorize, but I thought it might have been the beginning of embarrassment, which was interesting because she did not seem like someone who embarrassed easily. I should have asked better questions, she said. Most people do not, I said. It is not a criticism. Earth is not the kind of thing that comes up in conversation. She looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked at me again. Your homeworld tried to extinguish you for the entirety of your species' existence, she said. And instead of being extinguished, you became what you are. Yes. And what is that precisely? In your own words. I thought about it. The honest version, not the dramatic one. Difficult to stop, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once, with the precise economy of someone who has made a decision and does not need to say anything further about it. I would like you to stay on the assignment past the vote, she said. Regardless of the outcome, there will be further proceedings, further diplomatic missions. I believe I have been operating with an insufficient understanding of what a human protective asset actually represents, and I would like to correct that. That is fine, I said. I will also, she said, and this part cost her something, I could tell in the small tightening around her eyes, be reviewing my general assumptions about your species. That is also fine, I said. She stood, which meant the meeting was over. I stood too. You were correct, by the way, she said, as I moved toward the door. About the Keldratha's timing. I had also anticipated the challenge, but I had estimated a 40% probability of them moving before the vote. You estimated it at higher. 70%, I said. How did you arrive at 70? I counted the meetings, I said, and I thought about what I would do if I were them and I was running out of time. She looked at me with the focused, careful attention of someone storing information for later use. Good night, Marcus, she said. Good night, Ambassador, I said, and stepped out into the corridor. The panel lighting was low and blue. The corridor was empty. Somewhere below us, Mevrith, 9 turned in its orbit, indifferent to everything we were doing up here, massive and ancient and entirely unconcerned. I walked back to my quarters and stood at my window for a while. She was going to review her assumptions. That was what she had said, in her careful, precise way. What it meant, in a language under the language that I had spent 11 days learning to read, was that something had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, and not the easy warmth that the word colleague suggests. Something more careful than that. Something built on the specific and accurate recognition of what the other person actually was, as opposed to what you had assumed they were. I had been furniture. Now I was something she wanted to understand. I stood at the window and thought about Hexham, about the river that flooded every winter, about the charity shops on High Street, about winter mornings at 5 in the morning, running in the dark on wet ground because the world was not soft, and that was information, not a problem. The vote was in 6 days. Sorveth was not finished. I knew that. The corridor incident, the formal legal complaint, the chamber challenge, these were moves in a longer sequence, and I had seen enough of how the Keldrath operated to know that the next move was already being planned, and that it would come through legal procedure rather than physical enforcement, because the corridor incident had taught them something too. They had learned that the direct approach had a problem named Marcus Vale, so they would try something else. I was already thinking about what it might be. They moved on the 4th day before the vote. I expected the move. What I did not expect was the specific form it took, which was more technically precise than I had given them credit for. Sorveth filed a formal weapons possession violation with the Accord's legal arbitration panel, citing the restraint equipment I had been carrying in the corridor as an unlicensed defensive instrument under Article 44 of the Accord Security Instrument Charter. The article in question was a real article, the kind that sounds obscure until someone who has done their reading decides to use it. It stated that any individual operating in a protective capacity within a designated diplomatic zone was required to file advance notification of all carried equipment exceeding standard identification tools, with a minimum of 72 hours review by the Zone Security Authority. I had not filed that notification, not because I did not know the rule, because I had read it in my first week on the station when I had gone through every Accord security regulation that applied to my assignment, all 412 of them, in 3 evenings, which Owen had told me was obsessive, but which I had found straightforwardly useful. I had read Article 44. I had noted it. And then I had noted something else. The exception clause under Article 44, Section 8, subsection C. But Sorveth had not filed the motion against me directly. He had filed it against Velshira's diplomatic mission, using the legal principle of protective liability, which held that an ambassador's office bore formal responsibility for the conduct of its security personnel. It was elegant. It was designed to put Velshira in a position where defending me would cost her politically, and failing to defend me would demonstrate weakness in front of the swing vote delegations at exactly the wrong moment. She called me into her office when the filing came through. They have filed a possession violation, she said. She had the document on her screen and was reading it with a rapid focus she gave to everything important. They are citing Article 44. I know, I said. She looked at me. You know, I anticipated this category of move, I said. Not the specific article, but the legal approach. It is logical. The physical approach did not work. A legal challenge in the arbitration panel is the next step. You anticipated it, she said slowly, and yet you were carrying equipment that gives them ground for the challenge. There is an exception clause, I said. Article 44, Section 8, Subsection C. Notification requirements are waived in circumstances where prior notification would have compromised a documented protective assessment. I filed a protective assessment on day one of my assignment. That assessment noted a general threat environment that included corridor-based interdiction as a likely scenario. The equipment I carried was directly responsive to that documented assessment. She looked at me without moving for a moment. You read the entire Accord Security Charter, she said. In the first week, yes. 400 articles. 412. She was quiet. Outside the window, the gas giant turned. You planned for the possibility that you would need a legal defense before you needed a physical one, she said. I planned for the possibility that someone would try to use the legal system as a second approach after a physical approach failed, I said. So yes. You are, she said carefully, and I could tell she was choosing the word with the specific precision she gave to important choices, not what I expected you to be. I know, I said. Would you like me to appear before the arbitration panel myself? She considered this. That is an unusual approach. Normally, the accused party is represented by a registered Accord legal advocate. I know that too, I said. But a registered advocate who argues the exception clause will be heard as a technical defense, and the panel may find ways around it. If I argue it myself, I am a human being standing in front of the panel and explaining directly why I made the decision I made in the context of the documented threat environment. That is a different thing. She thought about it. I could see the calculation happening, the political angles, the risks. You are confident you can argue it, she said. Yes. Arbitration panels are not military environments. They follow a specific protocol. I have read the protocol, I said. She almost smiled. She caught it before it fully formed, but it was there. Of course you have, she said. The arbitration panel hearing was 2 days before the vote. The panel had 3 members. A Shanri arbiter, a senior member of a species called the Lorvian who were tall and gray and had the unhurried manner of beings accustomed to making binding decisions, and a human. The human was a woman named Priya Halford who had been in the Accord Legal Division for 8 years and who I had not met before. She acknowledged me with a nod when I entered the chamber. I nodded back. Sorveth had sent a legal advocate, a Keldrath specialist in Accord procedural law, who was very good and who knew it. He presented the violation cleanly and technically, without any of the political framing of the conclave speech. This was a different mode, precise, methodical, aimed at the panel and not an audience. I presented my response without notes. I had 3 things to establish. First, that the documentation of the threat environment met the criteria for the Article 44 exception clause. Second, that the equipment I carried was specifically responsive to that documented environment and not excessive relative to the assessed threat. Third, that the 72-hour notification window had been functionally superseded by the general threat assessment I had filed at the start of the assignment, which served the same informational purpose the notification requirement was designed to achieve. I made each point in order. I cited the specific article numbers and subsection references without hesitation. I referenced the corridor incident documentation, which the panel already had. I referenced my initial assessment filing. I walked through the logical connection between the documented threat and the specific equipment. The Keldrath advocate cross-examined me for 27 minutes. He was thorough. He found the edges of the argument and pressed them. I answered each question directly, without elaborating beyond what was asked, without hedging, without the kind of nervous over-explanation that makes panels think you're hiding something. Just the answer. Just the fact. The Lorvian panelist asked me 2 questions directly. The first was whether I had known, at the time I filed the initial assessment, that it would serve as a substitute for Article 44 notification if I later needed it to. I said yes. There was a pause. She made a note. The second question was whether I had filed the assessment with that secondary purpose in mind from the start. I said yes. There was a longer pause. Priya Halford looked at me across the panel table with the expression of someone who has just done a rapid mental revision. Then she looked back at her documents. The panel deliberated for 19 minutes. Then they dismissed the charges. The Lorvian panelists' written note, which was added to the official record, stated that the respondent had demonstrated a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory framework and had applied it with appropriate foresight. I thanked the panel. I walked out. Owen was waiting in the corridor outside. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the expression he wore when something had happened that he wanted to say something about, but was not sure how. Appropriate foresight, he said. It was in the documentation, I said. They put it in the official record, he said. In a Keldrath-initiated arbitration proceeding. Do you understand what that means politically? It means Sorveth tried to use the legal system to remove me, and I removed that option, I said. It means, Owen said, that the entire Accord legal division is now reading the official record a human security contractor running a procedural argument that senior advocates have not consistently managed in front of that panel. He looked at me. How long did you spend preparing? I had the relevant sections memorized from the first week, I said. I spent 2 evenings preparing the logical structure of the argument once I understood what they were filing. Owen was quiet for a moment. Marcus, he said, you are from Hexham. Yes. Well, the main attraction is a ruined Roman wall and a market on Tuesdays. And the Abbey, I said. People forget the Abbey. He laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh, the kind that escapes before you have decided whether it is appropriate. Go get some sleep, he said. The vote is the day after tomorrow. I got some sleep. The night before the vote, Velshera called me into her office one more time. She was standing at the window again, and again she looked like someone doing arithmetic on something large. Tomorrow, she said. Yes. I want to tell you something, she said. She did not turn from the window when she said it. I have been in diplomatic service for 41 years. I have managed proceedings involving species with far greater political influence than Earth currently holds. I have worked with protective personnel from 18 different member species. She turned then. None of them read the security charter in the first week, she said. Some of them probably should have, I said. None of them anticipated a legal challenge and prepositioned a counter-argument in their day one documentation, she said. None of them filed a threat assessment that doubled as legal protection before the threat had manifested. I was not certain it would be needed, I said, but it seemed efficient to file it in a form that would be useful if it was. She looked at me. You plan for multiple outcomes simultaneously, she said, from the very beginning, before you had any specific information about the threat environment. I plan for the kinds of outcomes that are typical in contested political environments with external opposition, I said, which is what Owen's briefing described this as being. That is exactly what I am saying, she said. You received a general briefing that described a contested political environment, and from that information alone you prepared for physical interdiction, legal challenge, and diplomatic complication, before any of them occurred. Yes, I said. Why? I thought about how to answer honestly. Where I come from, I said, the thing that keeps you safe is almost never a single response to a specific threat. It is the preparation you did before the threat decided what shape it was going to take. You cannot react faster than danger moves if you have not already decided what you will do in the categories of situation that danger tends to produce. So you prepare broadly in advance for categories. And then when something happens, you're not reacting. You are executing. She was very still. Your world taught you that, she said. My world taught everyone that, I said. Every human being who grew up on Earth learned some version of it. Some learned it in formal training. Some learned it from their parents, from the weather, from the geography, from the experience of living in a place that requires your attention or will take advantage of your inattention. The form varies. The underlying understanding is the same. Difficult to stop, she said. She was using my words back to me. Yes, I said. She nodded, the same single decisive nod she had given me before. The vote will go in our favor tomorrow, she said. I believe that. And when it does, I want you to know that this outcome belongs, in some meaningful part, to you. Not to your physical capability, though that was necessary. Not to your legal preparation, though that was decisive. to the fact that you were exactly what you were, without concealment, without performance, simply as a matter of how you operate. The chamber heard you. The panel heard you. What they heard was authentic, and authenticity is the most difficult thing to manufacture and the easiest to recognize. I did not know what to say to that, so I said thank you, which seemed small relative to what she had said, but was what I meant. Good night, Marcus, she said. Good night, Ambassador, I said. The vote passed, not by the margin anyone had expected. It passed by a wide margin, which Owen told me afterward was the largest first vote majority a new membership petition had received in 63 years. 3 of the delegations that had been meeting privately with Sorveth voted in favor of human membership. The Shanri voted unanimously in favor, all 14 delegates, their forearms the same deep blue I had seen in the chamber. I watched from my position on the central floor, and when the result was announced, I felt something. It was not the dramatic, sudden feeling that word implies. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of something large settling into place, the way a stone settles at the bottom of deep water, not with a crash, but with a slow, final weight. Velshera delivered her formal acceptance address. She stood at the central floor podium with the composed command of someone who had been working toward this moment for a long time and had long since decided not to perform it, but simply to inhabit it. She spoke about partnership, about the responsibility that came with belonging to something larger than any single species, about the particular value of perspectives that had been shaped by difficult circumstances. She did not mention Earth by name in this part, but she said, near the close, the Accord has always drawn its strength not from the uniformity of its members, but from the genuine difference of what each member brings. We have welcomed, today, a species whose history of survival, cooperation, and resourcefulness is unlike anything previously represented in this chamber. They will challenge us. They will surprise us. They will, on occasion, make us quiet in ways we did not expect. I believe this is precisely why they belong here. The chamber was not quiet when she finished. The chamber was loud, in the measured way that 4,000 species are loud when they are expressing approval, which sounded like nothing so much as weather. Sorveth left before the formal close of the session. I watched him go. He did not look in my direction. I did not expect him to. He was a political actor performing a loss with what dignity the circumstances permitted, and I respected the performance without finding it particularly interesting. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Owen was waiting again. He looked slightly different from the previous time. He looked like a man who had been handed something he had not known whether to expect and was now quietly deciding how to hold it. Largest majority in 63 years, he said. I heard, I said. The legal arbitration record is already in circulation, he said. 3 other species with contested membership petitions have asked for copies. That will be useful for them, I said. He looked at me. Marcus, what you did in that chamber, the speech, the panel, all of it. I did my job, I said. You did considerably more than your job, he said. Then I did my job, and then I did some additional things that were available to me and seemed useful, I said. He laughed again, the same surprised laugh. Go eat something, he said. There's a reception this evening in the senior diplomatic hall, and Velshera has asked for you to be present. As protection? I asked. As a guest, he said. I went and found something to eat. I found a small canteen on the civilian level, 2 floors below the diplomatic wing, where the species were more varied and the furniture was designed for multiple different body types, which meant nothing fit anyone perfectly, but the general effect was comfortable in a chaotic way. I ate something that was not quite bread and not quite soup, but was warm and filling. I sat at a table by a window and watched the gas giant below. Mevrith, 9 did not know about any of this. It was a planet doing what planets do, which is exist enormously and patiently while small things happen on the small objects orbiting it. I thought about Hexam, about the river, about the high street with the charity shops and the abbey that people forgot, about the hills above the town and the mornings before light and the ground that was wet and cold and did not care whether I was tired. I thought about my mother, who had a small house on a road called Allerwash Lane and who watched the news and sometimes sent me messages through the Accord civilian communication relay that said things like, "Saw they admitted Earth. Thought of you. Hope you are eating enough." I sent her a message now. It said, "Yes, eating enough. Going to a reception this evening. We'll explain later." She would ask about the reception. She would want to know what the food was like and whether I was wearing something decent and whether I had made any friends. She would not be particularly interested in the political dimensions of humanity's permanent membership in the Galactic Accord. She would be interested in whether I was all right. I was all right. The reception that evening was in the senior diplomatic hall, which was a long room with high ceilings and the kind of quiet good taste that expresses itself through the absence of anything excessive. Species moved through it in the particular way of beings who were professionally comfortable with making conversation with strangers, which meant the room had a hum to it that was social but measured. Velshera was at the center of it. She moved through the room the way she moved through everything, with precision and purpose and the exact right amount of warmth distributed to each interaction. Twice she caught my eye from across the room and gave a small nod. Ashanri Delegate approached me. She was small and quick, and her forearms were showing a pale, shifting green that my translation ship told me was associated with cautious curiosity in her species' color language. "Sergeant Vale," she said. "Just Marcus," I said. "Marcus," she said. I was in the conclave chamber. "I know," I said. "I saw you." "Your forearms," she said, and then stopped. "I am sorry. That is a translation difficulty. What I mean is the chamber noticed you when you spoke." "I know," I said. "My delegation has been discussing you," she said. "Some of us found the content of what you said." She paused, finding the word arresting. "That is one way to put it," I said. "I would like to ask you something," she said. "If it is appropriate." "Go ahead." "Were you afraid?" "In the chamber." Speaking to 4,000. I thought about this honestly. "No," I said. Her forearms shifted color, cycling through something quick and complex. "Why not?" "Because the chamber was not dangerous," I said. "It was just large." She was quiet for a moment. Her forearms settled on something I did not have a translation for. "I think," she said carefully, "that your species and mine would have a great deal to talk about." "I think so too," I said. She inclined her head and moved back into the room. Near the end of the evening, Velshera came and stood beside me. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking at the room. "Tomorrow there will be follow-up sessions," she said. "Administrative proceedings for formalization of membership. Then in approximately 3 weeks, I will be traveling to the Velcan homeworld for a separate series of diplomatic engagements." "I see," I said. "The travel will involve transit through 2 Keldrath-adjacent corridor systems," she said. "And several of the engagements involve politically sensitive negotiations." "That sounds like it would benefit from a security assessment," I said. "It would," she said. "I have already begun one." A pause. "However, I would prefer to have someone on site who has already demonstrated the capacity to plan for categories of outcomes rather than specific threats. Someone who reads charters in their first week. Someone who is, to use a precise word, thorough." "Adequate was the word you used at first," I said. She turned her head to look at me, and this time she did smile. It was small and precise and not performed, which made it the most genuine thing I had seen on her face since I had met her. "I was wrong about that," she said. "I know," I said. "You are not going to let me forget it," she said, and it was not quite a question. "I will be professional about it," I said. She looked away again, back at the room, and for a moment we stood there together, the alien diplomat and the human bodyguard from a small town in northern England, while the conclave ring turned slowly above the gas giant and the universe went on being large in all directions. "Will you take the Velcan assignment?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Good," she said. Outside, Mevrith 9 kept turning. The deep orange and pale gold bands of cloud moved in their ancient, slow patterns, knowing nothing and caring about nothing and being entirely beautiful about it. Inside, in a long room with good taste and a quiet hum of voices from 40 species, a human being from Hexham stood next to a Velcan diplomat and thought about 3 weeks from now, and the transit routes through Keldrath-adjacent corridor systems, and what kinds of contingencies a thorough person ought to plan for. I was already planning. It was just what we did.